Michael had exactly 17 seconds to decide whether to save two alien children or let them die. And in those 17 seconds, he would make a choice that would transform him from a forgotten port guard into the only thing standing between an innocent family and systematic extinction. By the time the sun rose 3 days later, he would be covered in blood that was not entirely his own, carrying wounds that should have killed him twice over, and holding in his hands the evidence that could either end an interstellar war or ignite something far worse. But that morning, in the rain-slicked alleys of a dying port city, all he knew was that 3 armored killers were hunting something small and terrified, and his body was already moving before his mind finished calculating the odds. The port district reeked of rust and rotting seaweed, the kind of smell that clung to your clothes and never left. Michael moved through the shadows between cargo containers, his boots silent on the cracked concrete, eyes scanning the perimeter with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The evening patrol was supposed to be routine, just another shift watching over humanity's last functioning spaceport, but something felt wrong. The air carried more than soot and decay tonight. He heard them before he saw them. Heavy footfalls, 3 distinct patterns, moving with coordinated purpose. Michael pressed himself against a rusted container and peered around the corner. 3 massive figures in dark, segmented armor advanced through the narrow passage between warehouse buildings. Galaxies hunters. Even in the dim light, their bulk was unmistakable, each one easily 7 feet tall, their armor reinforced with overlapping plates that clinked softly with each step. They moved like predators, methodical and patient, driving something toward the dead end ahead. Michael's military instincts kicked in instantly, his mind cataloging details with cold efficiency. This was not an arrest. This was an execution hunt. The lead hunter carried a brutal-looking club studded with metal spikes, while the other 2 had their hands free, ready to grab and tear. Their helmets swiveled in synchronized sweeps, scanning for movement. Whatever they were after was trapped in the alley ahead, and they were taking their time, savoring it. He did not feel pity. That emotion had burned out of him years ago during the war. But he felt something else, something harder and more dangerous. His code. The same instinct that had made him throw himself on grenades for his squad, that had driven him to drag wounded civilians from burning buildings while artillery rained down. It was not heroism. It was something primal, a refusal to let the strong crush the weak while he stood and watched. Michael grabbed a length of rusty rebar leaning against the container wall. It was heavy, solid, about 3 feet long with a jagged end. Not ideal, but it would have to do. He calculated angles, trajectories, timing. The hunters were focused forward, their attention locked on their prey. That gave him maybe 10 seconds. He stepped out of the shadows without a sound and moved toward them. The nearest Galaxy had just raised its club when Michael swung the rebar with everything he had, aiming for the gap between helmet and shoulder plate. The impact rang out like a bell, and the hunter staggered, dropping to one knee. Michael did not wait to see the result. He was already moving, using the surprise to reposition, drawing their attention away from whatever cowered in that dead end. The other 2 spun toward him with frightening speed. One of them barked something in their guttural language, a sound like grinding rocks. Michael planted his feet and raised the rebar, his face expressionless. He had their focus now. That was enough. The second hunter charged, and Michael sidestepped at the last possible moment, bringing the rebar down hard on its knee joint. The armor there was thinner, designed for mobility, and he felt something crack beneath the blow. The Galaxy howled and stumbled, but the third was already on him, massive hands reaching for his throat. Michael ducked under the grip and drove his shoulder into the hunter's midsection, using its own momentum against it. They crashed into a stack of empty fuel drums, metal clanging and rolling. He felt ribs creak under the impact but ignored the pain, scrambling away before those crushing hands could find purchase. He needed to keep them off balance, keep them focused on him. The first hunter had recovered now, blood seeping from beneath its helmet. All 3 of them were between Michael and the alley now, exactly where he wanted them. He backed away slowly, rebar held ready, leading them away from their original target. Whatever was back there had maybe bought 30 seconds. He hoped it was enough to run. Then he heard it, a sound that cut through the clash of metal and heavy breathing. A voice, high-pitched and terrified, speaking in broken, heavily accented English. "Human, please help. They kill us." Michael's eyes flicked toward the alley entrance for just a fraction of a second, and in that moment he saw them. Two small figures huddled against the wall, their skin an unnatural shade of blue-gray that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Children, alien children, but children nonetheless. The older one, maybe 8 years old, was shielding a smaller child behind her, both of them trembling with terror. The moment of distraction cost him. The lead hunter's club caught him across the shoulder, and Michael felt something tear. He rolled with the blow, came up swinging, drove the rebar into the hunter's faceplate hard enough to spiderweb the visor. The Gorethi stumbled back roaring. But now all three were between him and the children. This was going to get ugly. Michael feinted left, then dove right, sliding under a wild swing that would have taken his head off. He came up behind them, putting himself between the hunters and the kids. His shoulders screamed in agony, but his face showed nothing. He had been hurt worse, much worse. "Run," he said to the children, not taking his eyes off the Gorethi. "When I move, you run." The older child stared at him with huge dark eyes. "We cannot. Everywhere hunters. Everywhere death." Michael gritted his teeth. Of course it could not be simple. It never was. The hunters spread out, trying to flank him. Michael backed toward the children, his mind racing through options and discarding them just as quickly. He could not fight all three at once, not head on. He needed an advantage, something to even the odds. His eyes caught on the steam pipes running along the warehouse wall. Old infrastructure, poorly maintained, leaking in a dozen places. The Port Authority had been promising to fix them for years. He made his decision. "When the steam comes," he said to the children, "you grab my belt and do not let go. Understand?" The older child nodded once, sharp and quick. Smart kid. Michael waited until the hunters were close enough, then swung the rebar with every ounce of strength he had left. Not at them, but at the junction box where three corroded pipes met. The metal shrieked, the pipes ruptured, and suddenly the narrow space filled with a roaring blast of superheated steam and scalding water. The Gorethi bellowed in pain and confusion, their thermal sensors overloaded, their vision obscured. Michael felt small hands clutch desperately at his belt. He grabbed both children by the backs of their thin jumpsuits and literally threw them toward a narrow gap between buildings, a space barely 2 feet wide that the massive hunters could never fit through. He dove after them as a club whistled through the space his head had occupied a second before. The rebar clattered from his grip, but he did not stop. He shoved the children ahead of him into the gap, feeling the walls scrape his shoulders on both sides. Behind him, enraged roaring and the screech of metal as the Gorethi tried to force their way after them. They could not fit, not in armor, but Michael knew they would not give up. They would circle around, cut off the exit. He had bought seconds, maybe a minute. Time was bleeding away fast. The gap opened into another alley, this one running parallel to the waterfront. Michael grabbed both children, one under each arm, and ran. His shoulder felt like it was on fire, but adrenaline kept him moving. The smaller child whimpered but did not cry out. Good. Noise would kill them all. He knew these docks better than anyone. 6 years as port security, another 4 before that in the merchant marine. Every shortcut, every hidden space, every forgotten corner. He ducked through a hole in a chain-link fence, dragged the children through after him, kept moving. Behind them he could hear the hunters, their heavy footfalls getting closer. They were fast, terrifyingly fast for their size. Michael's breath came hard now, each inhalation bringing a stab of pain from his injured shoulder. The smaller child was barely conscious, her head lolling against his side. The older one was trying to help, her small legs pumping as fast as they could, but she was reaching her limit. They needed shelter. Now. His eyes caught on the old fishing warehouse ahead, the one that had been condemned 3 years ago after the roof partially collapsed. The doors were chained shut, but there was a loading bay around back with a broken roller door. Michael changed direction, angling toward it. They made it with maybe 20 seconds to spare. Michael dropped the children in the shadowed alcove of the loading bay and shoved them under the half-open door. Then he grabbed an abandoned forklift, its treads locked with rust, and used every bit of remaining strength to push it against the entrance. It barely moved, grinding inch by inch, but finally it wedged itself across the opening. Not impassable, but it would slow them down. Michael crawled under the door after the children, his shoulder screaming now, feeling wetness spread down his arm that was probably blood. The warehouse interior was dark and cold, smelling of old fish and mildew. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting strange shadows across piles of rotting nets and broken equipment. The children huddled together against a stack of crates, both of them shaking violently. Now that they had stopped moving, the smaller one started to cry, a strange warbling sound that made Michael's skin crawl. Not in disgust, but because it sounded so much like a human child crying. Pain was universal, apparently. He moved to the broken office at the back of the warehouse, found an old camping stove someone had left behind. Probably a homeless person's cache. The fuel canister was half full. He lit it, set it in the middle of the floor. The small flame pushed back the darkness just enough to see. Michael pulled off his jacket, ignoring the agony in his shoulder, and tore a strip from his shirt. He wrapped it around the wound, pulling it tight with his teeth. The children watched him with those huge dark eyes, no longer terrified but wary, assessing, trying to figure out if they had traded one predator for another. He pulled a metal flask from his jacket pocket, unscrewed it, and took a long pull of water. Then he held it out to the older child. She hesitated, looking between him and the flask, then slowly reached out and took it. She sniffed it cautiously, then drank, passing it to the smaller child after. "You are safe," Michael said, his voice rough. "For now." The older child wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "You save us." "Why, we are not your kind." Michael leaned back against a crate, his body finally beginning to register all the damage. "Does not matter what kind. Those hunters were going to kill you. That is enough. But we are enemy. Our people make war on yours." "You did not make war. You are kids." Michael closed his eyes for a moment, breathing carefully. Kids do not get to choose their wars. The older child studied him with an intensity that was unsettling. She looked too young to have that kind of weight in her eyes. Finally, she spoke. "My name is Ladapi. This is my sister, Helena's. She is 4 years old. I am 8. She said it like a confession. "We survived crash 4 days ago. Ship break apart in sky. Everyone dead. Except us. Except..." She trailed off, her eyes going distant. The smaller child, Helena's, had stopped crying and was now watching Michael with a mix of fear and curiosity. Her blue-gray skin was mottled with bruises, and one of her small hands was badly scraped. Michael dug in his pocket and found a crushed protein bar, one of the emergency rations he always carried. He broke it in half and held out the pieces to them. Ladapi took them carefully, sniffed, then handed one to her sister. They ate slowly, mechanically, like they were not really tasting it. "Why were they hunting you?" Michael asked after a moment. "Gorethi hunters do not work cheap. Someone paid a lot to have you dead." Ladapi looked down at her hands. "We carry inside us information, genetic code, proof." She struggled with the words, her English fragmenting. "Proof that our factions start war, not humans. Our people lie. Say humans attack first. But we know truth. Our mother put code in us before crash, to survive, to tell others." Michael felt something cold settle in his gut. "You are evidence." "Yes, evidence. So they hunt, so they kill. No witnesses, no truth." Ladapi's voice was flat, dead, too old for her years. "Your people think we are monsters. Our people say we are traitors. Nobody want truth. Easier to fight." The silence stretched out, broken only by the creak of the warehouse settling and the distant sound of waves against the dock pilings. Michael processed what she had told him. These were not just lost children. They were walking proof of a conspiracy, living evidence that could change the entire trajectory of the war. And someone very powerful wanted them erased. Outside, he heard the sound of heavy footsteps. Not close yet, but methodical, searching. The hunters had not given up. Michael stood, moving to the cracked window that looked out over the waterfront. 3 dark shapes moved along the pier, maybe 100 yards away. They were not running, not searching frantically. They were working a grid pattern, professional and precise. These were not just muscle. These were trained killers. "We cannot stay here," he said quietly. Lottie nodded. She had already known. "Where we go? They have equipment. They find us anywhere." Michael thought about the old service tunnels under the port, the ones from back when this was a functioning city with a working metro system. Most of them were flooded or collapsed, but there were still a few passable sections. He had explored them during his first year on security, back when he still cared about doing the job thoroughly. There is a way. Underground will be dark, will be dangerous, but it is better than waiting here to die. "Everything is better than death," Lottie said simply. She shook her sister gently. "Helena's, wake up. We move again." The smaller child whimpered but opened her eyes. Lottie spoke to her in their own language, a flowing musical sound completely at odds with the harsh situation. Helena's nodded, tears streaming down her blue-gray cheeks, but she stood on shaky legs. Michael found a length of rope in the debris and fashioned a crude harness, looping it around both children and tying it to his belt. If they fell or got separated in the dark, he would know immediately. It was not much, but it was something. He moved to the back of the warehouse, where he remembered seeing a maintenance hatch during his initial survey years ago. It was still there, hidden under rotting canvas and old nets. The lock was rusted shut, but Michael found a piece of rebar and used it as a lever, muscles straining. Something snapped, and the hatch swung open with a groan of tortured metal. Darkness yawned below, absolute and complete. A metal ladder descended into it, the rungs slick with moisture. The smell that wafted up was not pleasant. Stagnant water, rust, and something organic and rotten. "Down," Michael said. He did not waste words explaining or reassuring. There was no time. Either they went down or they died. Simple math. Lottie went first, her small hands gripping the ladder rungs. Michael followed with Helena's clinging to his back, her arms locked around his neck in a grip that was almost choking. He pulled the hatch closed above them, and the darkness became absolute. They descended in silence except for the drip of water and the scrape of their feet on metal. Michael counted rungs, 20, 30, 40. Finally, his feet hit solid ground, concrete, slick with moisture and moss. He could not see his hand in front of his face. He pulled a small LED pen light from his pocket, clicked it on. The beam was pathetically weak, barely pushing back the darkness, but it was enough to see they stood in a narrow tunnel, maybe 6 feet high, with curved concrete walls and ancient graffiti fading into obscurity. Water pooled on the floor, and something small scurried away from the light. "Stay close," Michael said, and started walking. The tunnel stretched ahead of them, branching occasionally into side passages that disappeared into blackness. Michael kept to the main road, using his memory of the old metro maps and making his best guesses at intersections. Behind them, somewhere far above, he heard the crash of metal on metal. The hunters had found the hatch. They would be coming down soon, and in these narrow spaces there would be no room to fight or run. He picked up the pace, half dragging Lottie, who was trying her best but clearly reaching her limit. Helena's had gone completely limp on his back, either unconscious or so exhausted she could not move. The pen light beam caught on things in the water, bones, definitely bones, and the rusted remains of shopping carts. Old newspapers turned to pulp. A child's doll with one eye missing that stared at them as they passed. The tunnel branched again, and Michael chose left, then right at the next junction, deliberately creating a confusing trail. But he could hear them now, the galaxies, their heavy boots splashing through water, the scrape of armor against concrete walls. They were in the tunnels. They were coming. "Faster," Michael hissed, and Lottie responded with a burst of speed that surprised him. The girl had reserves she was pulling from somewhere deep. They came to a section where the tunnel had partially collapsed, rubble blocking half the passage. Michael had to squeeze through sideways, feeling the rough concrete scrape his injured shoulder, pain flaring white-hot. He pulled Lottie through after him, then stood on the other side, breathing hard. The gap was maybe 18 inches wide, too narrow for the galaxies in their armor. But even as he thought it, he heard the whine of servos, the hiss of pressure releases. They were stripping the armor. They wanted the children badly enough to abandon their protection and come through on foot. Michael's mind raced. Without armor, The hunters were faster, more flexible, could follow anywhere. But they were also vulnerable. If he could somehow turn this into an ambush, use the darkness and confined space to his advantage. He looked around desperately. The tunnel here was wider, maybe 8 feet across, with several pipes running along the ceiling. Old steam pipes, water mains, electrical conduits long since dead. And there, in the corner, a maintenance alcove, just deep enough to hide 2 small children if they pressed themselves back. In there, he whispered to Lottie, pointing, "Take your sister. Do not move. Do not breathe. No matter what happens, do not come out until I come get you. You will fight them here, alone, in dark? I have to. Now go." Lottie's eyes were huge in the dimness, but she nodded and pulled her sister into the alcove. Michael helped them squeeze in, then stacked some fallen concrete chunks in front of the opening. Not enough to truly hide them, but enough that a casual glance might miss them in the dark. Then he clicked off his pen light and waited. The darkness was absolute. Michael had been in dark places before, night operations, underground bunkers, inside burning buildings filled with smoke. But this was different. This was the darkness of deep earth, pressing in from all sides, making even the sound of his own breathing seem loud and intrusive. He controlled it, slowed it down, made himself calm. His eyes would not adjust. There was literally no light to adjust to, but his other senses sharpened. He heard the splash of approaching footsteps, 3 distinct patterns. He heard the heavy breathing of large beings moving through confined spaces. He heard the scrape of something metal against stone. They were close now, very close. Michael pressed himself against the wall beside the gap in the rubble, made himself small, invisible. His hand found a piece of rebar on the ground, maybe 2 feet long, heavy and solid. It would have to do. The first Gorethi squeezed through the gap, grunting with effort. Michael could smell it now, a strange scent like copper and ozone. The hunter was barely through when Michael struck, bringing the rebar down with all his strength on what he hoped was the back of its skull. He felt impact, heard a crunch, and the Gorethi dropped. But there was no time to celebrate. The second one was already coming through, and it had heard the impact, was ready. Michael swung again, but this time his target blocked with a forearm, and pain shot up Michael's arms as metal met bone. The Gorethi grabbed for him in the darkness, and Michael had just enough warning from the displacement of air to dodge sideways. They grappled in the dark, Michael using his knowledge of the space to his advantage. He kicked out, found the first hunter's body on the ground, and shoved the second Gorethi toward it. The hunter stumbled, and Michael drove his shoulder into its midsection, using every bit of his weight and momentum. They crashed into the wall together, and Michael felt something crack. His own ribs or the hunter's bones, he could not tell. The third hunter was through now, and Michael heard it moving to flank him. He was surrounded, fighting blind against 2 opponents who probably had better night vision than him. The math was simple and brutal. Michael did the only thing he could think of. He found the gas main valve he had noticed earlier, one of the old safety shutoffs that were supposed to be checked but never were. He grabbed it with both hands and wrenched it open. Gas began hissing into the tunnel, invisible and odorless. This was the old natural gas before they added the smell. Dangerous, potentially explosive, definitely toxic in confined spaces. "Now we all die together," Michael said in the darkness, his voice carrying to the hunters. "Or you leave, your choice." For a long moment, nothing. Then he heard movement, retreating, the Gorethi squeezing back through the gap. They were not suicidal. They wanted the children alive, but not at the cost of their own lives. Michael waited until he could no longer hear them, then closed the valve, his hand shaking. He had been bluffing, had no way to actually ignite the gas, no lighter, no flame. But they had not known that. Hoped they had not known that. "Lottie," he called softly, "it is clear. Come out." The children emerged from their hiding place, Lottie supporting her unconscious sister. In the darkness, Michael could see nothing, but he heard Lottie's voice, steady despite everything. "That was smart. Dangerous, but smart." "Smart is not the word I would use," Michael said. "Come on. We need to keep moving before they figure out I was bluffing." They moved through the darkness, Michael feeling his way along the walls, counting his steps, trying to maintain his mental map of the tunnels. The air was still thick with gas, making his head spin slightly, but it would dissipate soon enough. He hoped. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Michael felt a faint current of air on his face. Fresh air, or at least fresher than what they had been breathing. They were approaching another exit. They had been walking for maybe an hour or an eternity. Michael could not tell anymore, when the tunnel opened up suddenly into a larger space. His penlight, when he risked turning it back on, revealed what looked like an old underground station, complete with rusted turnstiles and faded advertisements on the walls. Most were unreadable, but one caught his eye. A tourism ad from before the war, showing smiling humans and aliens together, shopping, laughing, living in harmony. A world that no longer existed. Rest, Michael said. 5 minutes. Drink water if you have any. They had no water. Michael's flask was empty, used up hours ago. His throat was raw, his lips cracked. But 5 minutes off their feet was better than nothing. Lottie laid Helena's down gently on a relatively clean patch of concrete and sat beside her, stroking her sister's hair. The younger child's breathing was shallow, irregular. She needed real medical attention, not this desperate flight through darkness. How much further? Lottie asked. Not far, maybe another mile of tunnels, then we come up in the factory district. From there, 2 miles to the canyons. Michael did not mention that those 2 miles would be the most dangerous part, crossing open ground with nowhere to hide. We will make it, Lottie said. It was not a question or a hope. It was a statement of fact, as if she could will it into being through sheer determination. Michael looked at this small alien child, bloodied and exhausted but unbroken, and felt something shift in his chest. Respect, maybe, or recognition. She was a survivor, same as him. Different species, different worlds, but the same core of steel that refused to bend. Yeah, he said quietly, we will make it. The 5 minutes passed too quickly. Michael pulled them both to their feet, and they continued. The station had 3 tunnel exits, and Michael chose the one that felt like it headed north-northeast toward the factory district. His internal compass was usually reliable, honed by years of navigation in unfamiliar territory. He hoped it still worked. The air was thick and hard to breathe, and several times they had to wade through water that came up to the children's chest. Michael carried them through those sections, ignoring the protest from his shoulder. Time became meaningless down there. They might have been walking for an hour or 3. Michael's internal clock, usually reliable, was thrown off by the darkness and the constant low-level pain. All he knew was that they were heading generally northeast, toward the old industrial district and the canyons beyond. Lottie did not complain once. She kept pace, kept quiet, and when Helena stumbled, she was there to catch her sister before Michael even had to turn around. The younger child had stopped crying, but was clearly at her limit, her breathing harsh and ragged. Finally, they reached another ladder leading up. Michael's light caught on a sign barely readable through decades of grime. Sector 7 Maintenance Access. He vaguely remembered this one. It came up in an abandoned factory complex on the edge of the port district. He made them wait at the bottom while he climbed up and carefully, silently, eased the hatch open a crack. Dawn light spilled in, painfully bright after the darkness. His eyes adjusted slowly. He could see the interior of what had once been a textile factory, now just empty concrete shells and broken machinery. More importantly, he saw no movement, no signs of the hunters. Michael pushed the hatch fully open and helped the children up. Helena's could barely climb anymore, her small body shaking with exhaustion. Michael ended up hauling her up by the harness as gently as he could manage. They emerged into the factory floor just as the sun broke fully over the horizon. Light streamed through shattered windows, illuminating years of decay and abandonment. Somewhere in the structure, birds had made nests. Their chirping was the first natural sound Michael had heard in hours that was not water dripping or concrete echoing. How far? Lottie asked. Her voice was steady, but her legs were visibly trembling. Another 2 miles, maybe 3. There is a place in the canyons, old military bunker from the pre-war days. Nobody knows about it but me. Michael looked down at them both. Can you make it? Lottie looked at her sister, then back at him. We make it. No choice. Michael nodded. No choice. That summed up their entire situation perfectly. They moved through the factory and out into the gray morning. The industrial district spread before them, a wasteland of rusting metal and crumbling concrete. Once this had been the manufacturing heart of the city, now it was just a tomb for dead dreams. But it also provided cover, hundreds of hiding places, and more importantly, it was between them and the canyons. Michael kept them moving at a steady pace, not too fast to exhaust the children completely, but fast enough that they made progress. He constantly scanned their surroundings, looking for any sign of pursuit. The Gorethi would have figured out they went underground by now. They would be searching the exit points, trying to guess where their prey would surface. He led them through a maze of alleys and collapsed buildings, across rusted catwalks that swayed dangerously under even their light weight, through sections where toxic waste from old factories had eaten through concrete and turned the ground into a treacherous mix of chemical-stained mud. Helena's had stopped being able to walk entirely. Michael carried her, the small alien child draped across his good shoulder, her breath hot against his neck. His own wound had stopped bleeding, mostly because it had clotted with dirt and sweat into something that probably guaranteed infection if he survived long enough for it to matter. Every step sent fresh pain lancing through his shoulder and down his arm. He ignored it with the same mechanical efficiency he ignored everything else that did not immediately matter for survival. They were crossing an open stretch between two warehouse buildings when Michael heard it. The distinctive whine of a Gorethi scanner. High-pitched, almost beyond human hearing, but he had heard it enough times during the war to recognize it instantly. "Down," he hissed, and they dropped behind a pile of rusted barrels. Michael set Helena's down as gently as he could and peered around the edge of their cover. 3 Gorethi hunters emerged from a side street, maybe 50 yards away. The same ones from the port, he was sure of it. The lead one still had its cracked visor. They were sweeping the area with handheld scanners, moving with the same methodical precision as before. Professional, disciplined, relentless. Michael calculated angles and distances. They could stay hidden, hope the hunters passed them by. But if those scanners were thermal, they would be spotted in seconds. Or they could run, try to make it to better cover. But Helena's could not run, and he could not carry her and fight at the same time. The decision was made for him when Helena's coughed, a small sound but explosive in the silence. All 3 Gorethi heads snapped toward their position instantly. "Run," Michael said, hauling both children to their feet. "That alley, go!" They ran, or rather he ran while dragging them, Latopi's legs pumping desperately and Helena's a dead weight in his arms. Behind them, heavy footfalls began, rapidly accelerating. The hunters were not bothering with stealth anymore. They had their prey in sight. The alley was narrow, maybe 15 feet wide, lined with ancient dumpsters and piles of refuse. Michael shoved the children ahead of him and spun around just as the first Gorethi rounded the corner. He grabbed one of the dumpsters and heaved with everything he had, his shoulder exploding in fresh agony. The heavy metal container tipped over with a crash, spilling decades of accumulated garbage into the alley and blocking the path. It would buy them seconds, maybe 10. They burst out the other side into a more open area, once a parking lot, now just cracked asphalt with weeds growing through it. The canyon walls were visible now, maybe half a mile away, stone formations rising up like jagged teeth. So close. Too far. Michael heard the crash as the hunter shoved the dumpster aside. He looked down at Helena's, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. She was done. Could not go another step. Latopi was barely better, stumbling, her face twisted with effort and fear. They were not going to make it. The math was simple and brutal. The hunters were too fast, too strong, and the children were too weak. Michael had bought them hours of life, but it was running out. Then he saw it, an old ventilation shaft, its grate hanging open, maybe 4 feet square. Too small for the Gorethi in their armor, barely large enough for him, and he would have to squeeze. But the children would fit easily. "There," he gasped, pointing. "Get in. Crawl as far as you can. Do not stop." "What about you?" Latopi asked, even as she was moving toward the opening. "I will be right behind you." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Latopi did not argue. She grabbed her sister and started pulling her toward the shaft. Michael turned to face the hunters. They emerged from the alley three abreast, moving with terrible purpose. The lead one raised its club. Michael had no weapon, no rebar, nothing but his fists and a body that was already failing. But he could buy time, a few seconds more, enough for the children to get away. He planted his feet and waited. The first Gorethi charged, and Michael ducked under its swing, driving his fist into what he hoped was a kidney. Pain exploded up his arm, but the hunter grunted and stumbled. The second one grabbed him, massive hands closing around his torso, and began to squeeze. Michael felt ribs crack, air forced from his lungs. He drove his thumbs toward where the helmet met the armor, found a gap, pushed with everything he had left. The Gorethi bellowed and threw him. Michael hit the ground hard, rolled, came up bleeding from a dozen new cuts. The third hunter was there, club raised high. Then something hit the Gorethi from behind. A desperate, flying tackle that barely moved the massive creature, but surprised it enough to make it stumble. Lotopi had come back. Stupid, heroic kid. "Go!" Michael shouted, blood in his mouth. "Get your sister out!" "Not without you!" Lotopi screamed back, tears streaming down her blue-gray face. She grabbed his arm and pulled with surprising strength. "Please, please come." The Gorethi recovered, turning toward them both. Michael saw the club start to descend. He shoved Lotopi hard, sending her stumbling toward the ventilation shaft, and threw himself forward into the hunter's legs. It was a suicide move, kamikaze, but it worked. The Gorethi toppled, its club going wide, crashing into the concrete. Michael did not remember getting up, did not remember running. One moment he was on the ground, the next he was at the ventilation shaft, and Lotopi was pulling him into the darkness. The opening swallowed them, and suddenly they were in a narrow metal tunnel, barely wide enough to crawl through. Behind them, the Gorethi reached the opening, their massive armored forms unable to follow. Michael heard enraged roaring, the screech of metal as they tried to tear the shaft open. But it was solid, set deep into the concrete foundation. "Crawl," Michael gasped. "Fast!" They crawled. Michael's shoulders screamed, his ribs ground against each other with every movement. Blood dripped from his mouth onto the metal floor. But he crawled. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the endless scrape of their hands and knees on metal. The shaft went on forever, branching occasionally but always continuing forward. Michael had no idea where it led, no plan beyond getting away. Sometimes they passed vents that let in light and air, brief moments of relief before plunging back into the dimness. Once, they crawled over what felt like bones, human or animal. Michael could not tell and did not want to know. Finally, after what might have been an hour or an eternity, the shaft opened up. They tumbled out into a larger space, a service junction of some kind, with pipes running along the walls and a metal door set in concrete. Michael collapsed against the wall, his body finally giving up. "Helena's?" he managed to ask. "Breathing," Lotopi said. She was cradling her sister, rocking back and forth. But bad, very bad. Michael forced himself to move. He stumbled to the door, found it sealed but not locked. The wheel turned with a shriek of rusted metal, and the door swung open. Beyond was a staircase leading down, carved into solid rock. At the bottom, another door. This one had faded military markings. The bunker. Somehow, impossibly, the ventilation shaft had led them directly to it. Michael did not believe in luck, or fate, or divine intervention. But he was not going to question it either. They descended the stairs and entered the bunker. It was exactly as he remembered from childhood explorations, a series of concrete rooms built during the last conventional war, before everything went nuclear and space-based. Forgotten by everyone except him and the friends he had explored with, most of whom were dead now. There was emergency lighting still functional, powered by some ancient battery system that refused to die. Dim green glow illuminated rooms filled with old supplies, crates of military rations, water tanks that might still be functional. Most importantly, it was defensible. One entrance, thick walls, multiple rooms that could be barricaded. Michael set Lotopi and Helena's down in what looked like it had been a command center. There were old chairs, a table, even some blankets in a locker that smelled of mildew but were dry. He wrapped both children in the blankets, then collapsed into one of the chairs. "We stay here," he said, For now, they cannot find us here. You are hurt, Lodope said, looking at him with those two old eyes. Bad hurt. You need help. I have had worse. Another lie, but what else was there to say? He pulled off his jacket and shirt, looked at his shoulder in the greenish light. The wound was deep, probably needed stitches he did not have, and was definitely infected. His ribs were bruised at best, broken at worst. Everything else was just pain and exhaustion. Sleep, he told them. We are safe for now. Lodope laid down next to her sister, both of them curled together under the blankets. But her eyes stayed open, watching him. Why, she asked. Why you do this? We are nothing to you. Michael leaned his head back against the wall, staring at the concrete ceiling. Someone has to, he said finally. Might as well be me. That is not answer. It is the only one I have. They were quiet for a while. Michael thought they had fallen asleep. Then Lodope spoke again, her voice small in the darkness. There is more than I tell you. Michael opened his eyes. More? Why they hunt us? Not just for code, not just for evidence. She sat up, her small face serious. I lied before. Not all lie. Code is real. Evidence is real, but there is more. Something worse. Tell me. Our mother, Faniella, she not dead, she alive. Trapped. Lodope's voice broke. At crash site, in canyon. She trapped in stasis field in ruins. We run because we hear hunters coming. She make us run, say find help, say come back. But we cannot go back alone. Too many hunters, too much danger. Michael felt something cold settle in his gut. You are saying your mother is still alive, at the crash site, and you need help getting her out. Yes, that is why I scream when hunters chase us. I scream, please, human, my mom caught in trap. But you not understand. You think I mean we trapped. I mean she trapped. Helena's and me, we just bait. Real target is her. She is leader. She is one who knows everything. Who has proof? We just carriers. She is key. Michael stared at her. You led me on this entire chase, let me think I was protecting you, when what you really needed was for someone to help you rescue your mother. Yes, I am sorry, but I cannot say truth. You maybe not help. Humans and my kind, we are enemies. Why you help enemy leader? But you help children. Everyone help children. So I let you think we are only ones. Then later, when you invest, when you care, I tell truth. She met his eyes without flinching. Is smart, in his survival, is what mother teach me. Michael should have been angry, should have felt manipulated, used, but all he felt was a strange sort of respect. This 8-year-old alien child had played him like a professional, had read human psychology perfectly, had gambled everything on a stranger's protective instincts. Where's the crash site, Easters? He asked. 3 miles, maybe 4. In canyon, where rocks are tall, ship buried in stone, stasis field still working, but battery dying, maybe 2 days left, then field fail, then she die. And the hunters will be waiting. They know she is there. They are using her as bait, waiting for anyone to try a rescue. Yes. Michael laughed, a harsh sound that turned into a cough. So we are all in a trap. Your mother is trapped. You and your sister are trapped. And now I am trapped too, because I cannot leave her to die. Can I? No, Lodope said softly. You cannot. Because you are human who helps children. And I am child asking for help. So you will go. You are a terrifying kid. You know that? For the first time, Lodope smiled. It was a small, sad thing, but genuine. Mother says same thing before she put code in us, before she make us run. She say, Lodope, you are small but dangerous, like knife in darkness. Michael closed his eyes, a knife in darkness. Great, that is exactly what I need right now. But even as he said it, he was already planning, already calculating routes, approaches, tactics, because Lodope was right. He could not leave the mother to die. It was not in him. Maybe that made him an idiot. Maybe it made him something else. But it was what it was. Sleep now, he told Lodope. Both of you, I need to think. This time she did. Within minutes, both children were unconscious. their breathing deep and even. Michael sat in the darkness, listening to them breathe, feeling his body slowly shutting down from exhaustion and injury. He had maybe half a day before the hunters found this place. They would track the ventilation shaft eventually, would search every abandoned structure in the area. The bunker was defensible, but not impregnable. Not against Gorethi hunters with time and determination, which meant he had to move first, had to hit them before they hit him, had to turn defense into offense, and he had to do it wounded, exhausted, with 2 small children depending on him, against 3 professional killers in armor. The math was impossible, but he had beaten impossible odds before. Not always, not usually, but enough times to know it could be done. Michael stood, ignoring his body's protests, and began to search the bunker. There were weapons here, he knew, old military supplies. If he was lucky, some of them might still work. He found the armory in the back room behind a door marked authorized personnel only. Inside were racks of ancient rifles, boxes of ammunition, grenades from an era when people still fought with explosives rather than energy weapons. Most of it was useless. The metal corroded, the gunpowder probably inert, but there were also blades, combat knives, combat spears, even a few swords from some forgotten ceremonial function. Michael picked up a knife, tested its weight. Still sharp, still balanced. He found rope, cable, some tools, old military flares, a box of what might have been early night vision goggles, long dead, but also a box of steel ball bearings, probably for some machine long since scrapped. Those could be useful. Michael worked through the night, building what he needed: tripwires, improvised explosives from chemical supplies, pressure plates. The bunker became a maze of traps, each one designed to slow down, injure, or kill armored Gorethi. He started methodically, working from the entrance inward. The first layer of defense was psychological, making them cautious, making them second-guess every step. He strung thin wire across doorways at ankle height, connecting them to stacks of heavy equipment that would crash down when triggered. Simple, visible if you looked for them, but effective at slowing in advance. The second layer was more insidious. He found industrial lubricant in a maintenance locker and spread it across a section of floor, then covered it with a thin layer of dust to hide the sheen. Anyone stepping there would lose their footing, and with the weight of Gorethi armor, the fall would be brutal. In the armory, he arranged a deadfall, old ceiling panels propped up with carefully balanced supports. One wrong step, one careless push, and several 100 pounds of concrete and rebar would come crashing down. He tested it 3 times, making sure it would work, making sure it would not trigger prematurely. Ladapi watched him work for a while, her small presence silent but attentive in the dim emergency lighting. Finally, she spoke. "You have done this before. Prepared kill zones." It was not a question. Michael did not look up from the tripwire he was adjusting, his fingers working with practiced efficiency despite the pain in his shoulder. Everyone who survives war learns to prepare kill zones, or they do not survive. You were soldier? Marine, long time ago. Different war, different enemy. Same principles. He pulled the wire taut, tied it off with a knot that would hold under tension. War does not change much, just the faces of the people trying to kill you. You kill many? Michael's hands paused for just a moment, then continued their work. Enough. Does it bother you, killing? He finished the tripwire and moved to the next position, carrying a bucket of nails he had straightened into caltrops. Every time. Anyone who says it does not is lying or broken, but bothering me does not mean I will not do it when I have to. Ladapi considered this, her head tilted slightly in that way children did when processing difficult concepts. My mother says similar thing. She says good warriors feel the weight of every life they take. Bad warriors feel nothing. Feeling is what keeps us from becoming monsters. Your mother sounds wise. She is. She is also dangerous. Many fear her. Ladapi paused, watching as Michael scattered the homemade caltrops across a dark section of corridor. You will like her, or fear her. Maybe both. Michael allowed himself a small smile, looking forward to it. He continued working, and Ladapi continued watching. After a while, she started helping, her small hands surprisingly deft at tying knots and positioning equipment exactly where he indicated. She learned fast, adapted quickly, asked smart questions about angles and force and trigger mechanisms. A natural tactician, just like she had said. "Why you help us?" she asked eventually, her voice carefully neutral. Truth this time, not because we are children. Real reason. Michael stopped working and looked at her. Really looked at her. This small, blue-gray child, with eyes too old for her years, who had manipulated him with cold efficiency and desperate love, who was now helping him build death traps in a forgotten bunker while her sister slept in the next room. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Maybe because someone needs to. Maybe because I am tired of watching the strong destroy the weak. Maybe because I have spent too many years trying to forget I used to be someone who cared. And you reminded me." He went back to his work, setting up a bucket of corrosive chemicals balanced on a door frame. Maybe all of those reasons. Maybe none of them. Does it matter? Yes, it matters, because reasons determine what you do when things get harder, when helping costs everything. Lottape's voice was quiet but intense, and Michael recognized the weight behind her words. This was not idle curiosity. This was a test. If you help because you feel sorry for us, you will quit when sorry is not enough. If you help because of code, because of principle, you will not quit. You will die first. Cheerful thought. I need to know. Helena's needs to know. Mother needs to know. Can we trust you when everything goes to hell? Or will you run when smart thing is run? Michael set down the wire cutters he had been holding and knelt down to Lottape's level, ignoring the protest from his knees and the sharp pain in his ribs. He looked her straight in the eyes, and he did not flinch from what he saw there. Fear and desperation and a desperate, fragile hope that he would not let them down. "I have never been smart enough to run when I should," he said quietly. "Probably why I am still alive when most of my unit is not. Too stupid to know when to quit. My sergeant used to say I had a death wish. Maybe he was right. But that stubbornness, that refusal to walk away even when any sane person would, that is what kept me going through 3 tours and more firefights than I can count." He paused, making sure she understood. "So yeah, kid, you can trust me. I am in this until the end, whatever that looks like. I do not quit. I do not run. Not from fights, not from responsibility, not from scared children who need someone to stand between them and the monsters." Lottape studied his face for a long moment, her 2 old eyes searching for any hint of deception or uncertainty. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded once, sharp and certain. "Good, because Mother will test you. She will push to see where you break. Everyone breaks eventually. But the place where you break, that is what defines you. You are way too young to be this cynical. I am child of war. We do not get to be young." There was nothing to say to that truth. Michael stood, joints protesting, and went back to preparing the bunker for what was coming. Lottape helped in silence, and together they built a maze of death, trap by trap, wire by wire. Around 3 in the morning, Michael heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned to find Helena standing there, awake for the first time since they had entered the bunker. Her eyes were huge in her small face, reflecting the green emergency lighting, and she looked even more fragile than before, if that was possible, like she might shatter at a loud noise. She said nothing, just watched him work with an intensity that was uncomfortable. Her gaze tracked his every movement as he adjusted a tripwire, tested the tension, secured the trigger mechanism. Finally, Michael spoke, keeping his voice gentle. "You feeling better?" Helena's did not answer verbally. Instead, she moved to where he had been arranging ball bearings and began sorting them by size with quick, precise movements. Not random, she was organizing them for maximum effect when scattered, creating a pattern that would be most difficult to traverse. Her small fingers moved with absolute certainty, arranging clusters of larger bearings that would turn ankles, interspersed with smaller ones that would roll underfoot and spread the dangerous area wider. "Smart," Michael said, genuinely impressed. "Did not think of that." Helena still did not speak, but her hands moved with surgical precision, arranging and rearranging until she was satisfied. Then she looked up at him, and for just a moment, Michael saw past the trauma and fear and silence to the fierce intelligence underneath. This child was not broken. She was bent, compressed like a spring under immense pressure, but not broken. When she finally uncoiled, when she found her voice again, she would be formidable. She pointed to the entrance corridor, then to the positions Michael had prepared, then made a gesture with her hands, a sweeping motion that drew things together, followed by a pinching gesture that compressed them into a smaller space. It took Michael a moment to understand, then it clicked. You are saying to funnel them, make them bunch up in the corridor where I can hit multiple targets at once. Helena's nodded once, sharp and certain, exactly like her sister. You are right, that is better. Michael began moving some of his equipment, repositioning traps to create a natural funnel that would compress the hunters' formation, force them to cluster where he could use their mass against them. You do not talk much, do you? Helena's made a gesture at her throat, then shook her head slowly. Not that she could not talk. She physically could. Michael had heard her voice when Lottie woke her. But something had happened, something during or after the crash that made her choose silence. Trauma deep enough that words felt unsafe. That silence was the only defense she had left. That is okay, Michael said, continuing his work. Actions speak louder anyway. You just saved my life with that idea, even if I have not died yet to prove it. Helena's almost smiled, almost. The corners of her mouth twitched upward for just a fraction of a second before falling back to neutrality. But it was there, that tiny spark of something other than fear. Progress, maybe. Hope, possibly. Then she went to sit beside her sleeping sister, curling up against Lottie's back, her small hand clutching her sister's shirt. Lottie murmured something in their language without fully waking, and Helena closed her eyes, her breathing evening out. Michael watched them for a moment, these two small alien children who had somehow become his responsibility, and felt the weight of it settle heavier on his shoulders. They trusted him. They had no one else to trust, and he would probably die failing them because the math was simply impossible, but he would die trying. That was all anyone could ask. He continued working until dawn light began filtering through the ventilation grates, painting the concrete walls in shades of gray and pale green. By then, the bunker was ready. Every entrance, every corridor, every room was a potential killing ground. The main entrance corridor was a funnel of death, just as Helena's had suggested, with multiple overlapping traps that would trigger in sequence, each one driving the hunters forward into the next. It would not stop a determined force, but it would slow them down, cost them blood, buy precious seconds. Michael made one final check of all his preparations, testing each tripwire with gentle pressure, verifying that every mechanism was properly set. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion, and he had to blink several times to clear his vision. How long had it been since he slept? 36 hours? 40? Time was becoming fluid, marked only by the progression from one crisis to the next. He allowed himself to sit for a moment, his back against the concrete wall, feeling every injury his body had accumulated. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, pulsing pain that suggested infection was setting in. His ribs ached with every breath, and he was pretty sure at least two were cracked. The cut on his forehead had clotted but still oozed when he moved wrong. Multiple bruises, countless small cuts, muscle strains in places he had not known existed. The pain pills from earlier had worn off completely, leaving nothing but raw sensation. He dry swallowed 2 more from the bottle he had found in the first aid kit, knowing he was probably doing damage to his liver or kidneys or both. But what did that matter if he did not survive the day? Dead men did not worry about organ damage. Lottie woke as the first sounds of heavy footfalls reached them from above. Her eyes snapped open, instantly alert, and she was on her feet in a heartbeat. No grogginess or confusion. Pure survival instinct, the kind soldiers developed after too long in combat zones. She shook Helena's awake with gentle urgency, speaking softly in their musical language. They are here, she said unnecessarily, looking at Michael. Michael nodded and picked up the spear he had chosen earlier, simple, balanced, with a good steel blade that would punch through mail if not plate. Remember the plan. You hide when the fighting starts. You do not come out. You do not try to help. You serve it. That is your only job. Your job is survive too, Laudapi said, her voice carrying more emotion than usual. I will do my best. It was not a promise, because he could not promise that. But it was all he could offer. He took his position in the central corridor, the spear held loosely in his hands, his breathing controlled, his mind clear despite the exhaustion. This was familiar territory, the waiting before battle, the calm before violence. He had been here before, many times in different countries under different flags against different enemies. The details changed, but the essence remained the same. The quiet acceptance that the next few minutes might be your last and the determination to make them count. The sounds from above grew louder, more distinct. They were working on the door lock, methodical and careful. No rushing, no carelessness. Professional killers doing professional work. Good. Slow was good. Every second of delay was another second the children stayed alive. But even as he thought it, Michael knew the truth. This was likely his last stand. The math was simple and brutal. 3 armored Galaxies hunters against 1 injured human with primitive weapons in a confined space. Even with all his traps and preparation, all his military training and combat experience, the odds were overwhelmingly against him. He would probably die here, in this forgotten bunker, far from anyone who might remember his name or care that he was gone. The thought did not frighten him. He had made peace with death a long time ago, during the war, watching friends die around him in ways both sudden and slow. What frightened him was failing, letting those children down, leaving them alone and unprotected in a hostile world that wanted them dead. That was unacceptable. So he would not fail. Simple as that. He would hold this position until they were safe, until they had a chance to escape. And if that meant dying in the process, well, everyone died eventually. At least this way, his death would mean something more than just another statistic in a forgotten war. The lock gave way with a metallic snap that echoed through the corridor. The door swung open slowly, revealing the dim morning light beyond and throwing a long shadow across the threshold. A massive shadow filled the doorway, too large to be human, too broad to be anything but Galaxies in full armor. Michael tightened his grip on the spear and waited. As dawn light began to filter through the ventilation grates, he heard it, the sound he had been waiting for. Heavy footfalls, above ground, moving in a search pattern. They had found the bunker. Michael moved to where the children slept and gently shook Laudapi awake. Her eyes opened immediately, no grogginess, instantly alert. A survivor's reflex. They are here, he whispered. She nodded and began waking Helena's, speaking softly in their language. The smaller child whimpered but did not cry out. When the fighting starts, Michael said, you take Helena's and hide in the far room. There is a crawl space behind the water tanks. Get in there and do not come out until I come for you. If I do not come for you by sunset, you go up through the vent shaft and run for the canyons. Understand? You will die. Maybe, maybe not. But if I do, you do what I said. Your mother needs you alive, more than she needs you to die trying to rescue her. Laudapi looked like she wanted to argue, but she did not. She just nodded once and took her sister's hand. Michael picked up the spear he had chosen, a simple thing with a good steel blade, and positioned himself in the central corridor. He could hear them now, at the main door, working on the lock. They were taking their time, professional and careful. They knew their prey was trapped. No need to rush. The door opened. Michael waited in the darkness, controlling his breathing, his heart rate. The first Galaxies ducked through the doorway, its bulk nearly filling the frame. Michael let it come, let it take 2 steps, 3. Then he triggered the first trap. The tripwire released a swinging counterweight, 500 pounds of concrete and metal that had once been part of a support pillar. It caught the Galaxies in the side with a sound like a car crash. The hunter went down, its armor crumpling, gasping for air. The other 2 roared and charged, no longer careful. Michael had counted on that. Anger made people stupid, even Galaxies. The second trap was a pressure plate that released a cascade of ball bearings across the floor. The hunter's heavy boots found no purchase. One went down hard, its helmet cracking against concrete. The other managed to stay upright, but off balance. Michael moved. He drove the spear forward with both hands, all his weight behind it, aiming for the gap between helmet and chest plate on the standing hunter. The blade went in, found something soft, and the Gorethi screamed. Michael twisted and pulled back, the blade coming free red with blood that was darker than human blood, almost purple. The hunter that had fallen was trying to get up, scrambling on the ball bearings. Michael grabbed a rope hanging from the ceiling, part of another trap, and pulled. A net of cables dropped from above, weighted with more concrete. It hit the Gorethi and drove it back down, tangling its limbs. 2 down, 1 to go. The third hunter, the one with the cracked visor, had recovered from the swinging counterweight. It stood in the doorway, blood seeping from beneath its armor, but still upright, still fighting. It raised its spiked club with both hands and advanced slowly, carefully now, watching for more traps. Michael had no more traps. Not ones that would stop this one. It had seen them all, learned from them. It was down to him and the hunter, one-on-one in a narrow corridor with no room to maneuver. He raised the spear. They circled each other for long seconds, neither committing. The Gorethi was hurt, limping slightly, but still immensely strong and protected by armor. Michael was human, wounded, exhausted, with nothing but primitive weapons. The hunter feinted high, and Michael raised the spear to block. The real attack came low, a sweeping kick that took Michael's legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, rolled, came up with the spear somehow still in his hands. The club descended like a meteor. Michael jerked aside at the last instant, felt the wind of its passage, heard it crater the concrete where his head had been. He thrust upward with the spear, caught the hunter's armpit where there was only mail, not plate. The blade went in 2 inches before catching on something. The Gorethi roared and backhanded him. Michael flew across the corridor and hit the wall, his vision exploding into stars. He tasted blood. Probably bit his tongue. The hunter advanced, club raised for the killing blow. Michael's hand found something on the floor, one of the combat knives he had scattered around. His fingers closed on the handle. The club started to fall. Michael threw the knife. It was a desperate move, no time to aim, pure instinct. The blade spun once, twice, and buried itself in the cracked visor, right where the thermal sensor lens was. The Gorethi's swing went wild, the club slamming into the wall inches from Michael's head. The hunter stumbled, clawing at its helmet, trying to get the knife out. Michael dove forward, grabbed the spear he had dropped, and drove it up through the joint where the helmet met the neck. The Gorethi made a gurgling sound and collapsed. Michael stood there, breathing hard, covered in blood. Some his, some not. His entire body was screaming. He might have broken something new in that last impact. Did not matter. He checked the other 2 hunters. The one tangled in cables was still alive but unconscious. The one he had stabbed first was dead or dying. Michael took their weapons, their equipment. The thermal scanners would be useful. So would the armor, if he could figure out how to strip it. But there was no time. More would come. They always sent reinforcements. Michael limped to the back room where the children were hiding. Clear, he called out softly. Lotte emerged from behind the water tanks, still holding her sister. Her eyes went wide at the sight of him. You alive? Barely. Michael grabbed a first aid kit he had found earlier, tore it open with his teeth. Listen to me. We need to move now. Those 3 came alone, but others will follow. We have maybe an hour, maybe less. To crash site? Lotte asked. To crash site. Michael wrapped fresh bandages around his worst wounds, took some pain pills that were probably expired, but who cared? You said 3 or 4 miles. Can you guide us? Yes, I remember way. Helena's and I, we walk every night trying to plan rescue, trying to find courage. She looked down. Never find it. Until you. I am not courage, Michael said. I am just too stupid to know when to quit. He strapped weapons to himself, knives, a short sword, one of the Gorethi clubs that he could barely lift. Loaded his pockets with anything that might be useful. Then he picked up Helena's, who had not spoken a word since the fighting started, and nodded to Lotte. Lead the way. They left the bunker by an emergency exit tunnel Michael had discovered during his search. It came out in a ravine half a mile from the main entrance, hidden by brush and fallen rocks. The morning sun was high now, burning off the mist that clung to the canyon floor. Lotte led them through the maze of stone and sand, moving with surprising confidence for a child who had been here only a few days. She chose paths that provided cover, avoiding open stretches, always watching the sky for any sign of aerial search. Michael followed, carrying Helena's, his body running on fumes and stubbornness. The pain pills helped, but they also made everything slightly unreal, gave the world a distant, dreamlike quality. He shook his head, fighting to stay focused. They had been walking for maybe an hour when Lottie stopped suddenly, holding up her hand. Michael froze. She pointed ahead to where the canyon narrowed between two tall rock formations. There, she whispered, crash site beyond. But many hunters. I see their marks. Their signs. Michael set Helena's down gently and crept forward to look. The canyon opened into a wider bowl, and there in the center, half buried in sand and stone, was the remains of a spacecraft. It was small, maybe the size of a large aircraft, its hull torn open and blackened. But one section looked intact, a pod of some kind, glowing faintly with blue energy. The stasis field. And inside, he could just make out a figure. But between them and the crash site were at least 6 galaxies, maybe more, stationed at strategic points around the bowl. They were not actively searching. They were waiting, watching. A trap within a trap. Michael studied the layout with professional eyes. 6 visible, probably more hidden, assuming he could somehow take down the visible ones without alerting the others, which was impossible. He would still have to break the stasis field, extract 1 prisoner, and escape with said prisoner plus 2 children, all while being pursued by however many reinforcements arrived. The math was not just impossible, it was suicidal. So, Lottie whispered, appearing beside him, what now? Michael looked at her, this small alien child who had manipulated him into this position with cold calculation and desperate love. Now I do something really stupid. Plan? I walk in there, draw their attention. While they are focused on me, you get to your mother. Use this. He handed her a small tool he had taken from one of the dead hunters. It is a field disruptor. Point it at the stasis field, press the button, hold it for 5 seconds. The field will collapse. Then what? Then you run. Take your mother and Helena's and run. There is a trail on the east side of the bowl. You see it? That leads to an old settlement, abandoned but with working water pumps. Hide there. I will find you if I can. And if you cannot, then head north. Keep going until you hit the river. Follow it downstream. Eventually, you will reach human territory. Tell them your story. Tell them about the code, the evidence. Someone will listen. Lottie stared at him for a long moment. This is goodbye. This is me buying you time. You will die. Probably. Why, we are not your people. Our kinds are enemies. This is not your fight. Michael looked out at the crash site, at the glowing stasis pod, at the waiting hunters. I made it my fight when I picked up that rebar in the alley. Too late to change my mind now. He stood before Lottie could say anything else, before he could change his own mind, and started walking down into the bowl. He moved openly, not hiding, not sneaking, just walking, 1 foot in front of the other, weapons visible on his belt and back. The galaxies spotted him almost immediately. Confusion spread through their ranks. One human, alone, wounded, walking toward them like he was out for a morning stroll. They did not know what to make of it. Michael stopped in the center of the bowl, maybe 50 yards from the nearest hunters. He raised his voice, speaking in the broken galaxy he had learned during the war. I am Michael. I killed 3 of your hunters. Come and kill me if you can. The challenge was clear and unmistakable. The galaxy did not do subtle. They understood one thing, strength and the willingness to use it. The nearest hunter roared and charged. The others followed. 6 became 7, 8, as hidden sentries emerged from concealment. They all wanted a piece of the human who had dared to kill their brothers. Michael drew the sword, a simple cavalry saber from the bunker, and waited. Behind him, far enough away that none of the hunters were looking that direction, he saw a small blue-gray figure darting from rock to rock, carrying an even smaller figure, heading for the crash site. The first hunter reached him. Michael sidestepped its wild swing and cut at its leg, the blade finding the joint behind the knee. The hunter went down. Michael did not finish it. He was already moving to the next one, parrying its club with the sword, getting inside its reach. driving his shoulder into its chest. It was not about winning, it was about lasting, about keeping their attention, about giving Laudapi time. The Garathi surrounded him. Michael fought with the cold efficiency of someone who had been here before. In other fights, other wars, he used his smaller size to his advantage, staying mobile, striking at joints and gaps, never standing still. When the sword broke, and it did after the third kill, he picked up a fallen club and kept fighting. A blow caught him across the back, and he felt something crack. He rolled with it, came up swinging, caught a hunter across the face, its helmet dented. Another blow to his side, and pain exploded through his torso. Ribs definitely broken now. He stabbed upward with a knife he did not remember drawing, found something soft, twisted. The Garathi were no longer roaring. They were working in silence, professional now, realizing this human was more dangerous than they had thought. They spread out, trying to flank him, using coordinated attacks. Michael's vision was starting to blur. Blood ran into his eyes from a cut on his forehead. His lungs burned. Every breath was agony. He was losing. But behind him he heard it, the sudden silence of the stasis field powering down. A gasp as someone took their first breath in days. Laudapi had done it. Michael smiled through broken teeth and kept fighting. A club took him in the chest and he felt ribs cave in. He went down hard, could not get up. The Garathi surrounded him, clubs raised. This was it, the end. He had bought maybe 5 minutes, hoped it was enough. The club started to fall, then something blue and furious smashed into the nearest hunter with the force of a runaway truck. Michael, fading in and out of consciousness, saw a tall figure, blue-skinned and powerfully built, moving through the Garathi like a hurricane. She, definitely female, even with all the armor, fought with a combination of brutal efficiency and barely controlled rage. The Garathi tried to regroup, but they were suddenly on the defensive. The newcomer moved too fast, hit too hard, knew exactly where their armor was weakest. She carried no weapons, just her fists and feet, and the kind of violence that came from someone with nothing left to lose. Michael tried to stand, could not. His body was done. He had pushed it past its limits, and now it was simply shutting down. He lay there watching the fight through darkening vision and felt strangely at peace. Then strong hands were pulling him up, surprisingly gentle despite their power. He looked up into blue-gray eyes set in a face that was beautiful and terrible at the same time. "You are Michael," the woman said. Her voice was musical but hard, like a blade made of crystal. "My daughters tell me you saved them." Michael tried to speak, coughed up blood instead. The woman, Finiella, he remembered, shifted her grip and lifted him like he weighed nothing. "Laudapi," she called out. The girl appeared from behind a rock, still carrying her sister. "Guide us to shelter. Now." "The hunters," Laudapi began, "are dead or running. Move." They moved. Michael drifted in and out as Finiella carried him, feeling the powerful rhythm of her stride, the steadiness of her grip. Once he surfaced enough to see Laudapi walking beside them, looking up at him with those old eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. Michael tried to respond, but darkness took him again. He woke to pain, comprehensive, all-consuming pain that radiated from every part of his body. But he woke. That was something. He was lying on something soft in a dim space that smelled of stone and water. The old settlement, he guessed. His vision focused slowly, and he saw Faniella sitting nearby, watching him with an intensity that was uncomfortable. "How long?" he managed to rasp. 6 hours. I thought you would not wake." She stood and moved closer. Up close, he could see she was even more imposing than he had thought, easily 6.5 feet tall, muscular in a way that human women rarely were. Scars marked her blue-gray skin, old ones and new, a warrior. "My daughters say you fought through an army for us. Say you asked nothing in return. Why?" Michael tried to sit up, failed, gave up. "They asked for help. I could help. Simple." "Nothing is simple, especially not between our kinds." "Then maybe it should be." Faniella studied him for a long moment. "The Garathi will not stop. More will come. They will hunt us until we are dead, or they have the evidence destroyed. Then we make sure the evidence gets out first." "We?" "I came this far. Might as well finish the job. For the first time, Faniella smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger, less hard. You are either very brave or very foolish, Michael of the humans. Probably both. Latopi appeared in the doorway, carrying a bowl of water. She knelt beside Michael and held it to his lips. He drank gratefully, the cool liquid easing his parched throat. Mother says you have 5 broken ribs, internal bleeding, and head trauma, Latopi informed him matter-of-factly. She says you should be dead. Not yet, Michael said. Still have work to do. Stubborn, Faniella observed, like stone that refuses to break. Stubbornness is pretty much my defining characteristic. Over the next 3 days, Michael learned many things. He learned that Faniella was not just a resistance leader, but a military commander with decades of experience, a veteran of conflicts that had shaped her species' recent history. She had fought against her own faction when they had started the false flag operation that began the war with humanity. She had proof, carried in the genetic code she had implanted in her daughters, but also in her own implants, layers of data that proved beyond doubt who had struck first and why. On the second morning, as Michael struggled to stand for the first time, Faniella told him more. They were alone in the main chamber while the children explored the settlement's water system, and she spoke with the careful precision of someone unburdening a heavy secret. I was intelligence commander for the Outer Colonies fleet, she said, her voice low. I saw the orders come through, saw the planning documents. They were going to hit your commercial shipping lanes and make it look like piracy, then escalate from there. Blame humanity for responding to what they claimed was your aggression. Start a war that would unite our fractured factions against a common enemy. Why bang? Michael asked, leaning heavily against the stone wall. Why start a war over lies? Power, resources. The outer colonies were losing influence to the inner systems. War was a way to consolidate control, redirect anger outward instead of inward. She looked away. I tried to stop it, tried to bring evidence to the Oversight Council. Instead, they marked me for elimination. My entire command structure. My family. Your daughters. Yes, I managed to encode the evidence into their genetic structure before they could purge it from my systems. Biological data storage, harder to detect, impossible to delete without killing them. Then we ran. Her hands clenched into fists. 3 years we have been running. 3 years watching my children grow up as fugitives, learning to fight and hide instead of learning to be children. And now, finally, we have a chance to end it. Michael was quiet for a moment, processing. The hunters, they knew about the genetic encoding. They suspected, after they destroyed our chip, they could have killed us immediately. Instead, they set up the stasis trap, tried to capture us alive so they could extract the data first, make sure it was destroyed properly. But Latopi and Helenas escaped before they could be taken. She looked at him with those intense eyes. You saved them. You saved all of us. Why might we already had nothing to you, Abby. You keep asking that. Because I do not understand. In my world, no one helps without expectation of return. No one risked everything for strangers. Yet you did. You are doing it still, even now when you can barely stand. Michael thought about how to answer, about all the reasons and non-reasons, the tangle of instinct and principle, and maybe just stubborn refusal to let bad people win. When I was in the war, he said finally, the first one, the human war before your people arrived, I watched my sergeant die, mortar strike. He was hit bad, knew he was not going to make it. Last thing he said to me was make it matter, not make it mean something, not make it worth it, just make it matter, like he was passing on a responsibility. Michael shifted position, grimacing. I think about that a lot. All the people who died, all the suffering and waste. How do you make any of it matter? And the only answer I have found is to try to prevent more of it, to step in when I can, to not let the strong crush the weak just because they can. That is a heavy burden, Faniella said quietly. Yeah, but it is mine. They were silent for a while. Then Faniella reached out and touched his shoulder, the gesture of respect she had seen her make to her daughters. You would be welcome among my people. If we survive this, if there is peace, You would be honored as kin friend, family, by choice. I am not sure I would survive your people, Michael said with a weak smile. You are all terrifying. You fought 8 Gorethi hunters, alone, and lived. You are more than qualified. He learned that Helenus, who still barely spoke, was actually a genius in her own right, gifted with eidetic memory and able to process information at speeds that seemed impossible. The reason she was silent was trauma, not inability. On the third day, when Michael was sitting outside the shelter trying to regain his strength, Helenas approached him and handed him a small piece of flat stone. On it, she had scratched a detailed map of their escape route, every turn, every landmark, perfectly recalled. This is incredible, Michael said, studying the map. You remembered all of this? Helenas nodded, then took the stone back and added more details. Locations where they had seen hunter patrols, places where water might be found, dangerous areas to avoid. All of it precise, all of it useful. You are going to help us get to the settlement, Michael realized. You have been paying attention to everything, building a mental map. Another nod. Then Helenas did something unexpected. She took Michael's hand and placed it on her head, a gesture he did not understand until Faniella explained later that it was how Gorethi children asked for protection from trusted adults. A request for guardianship. Michael felt something crack in his chest, some wall he had built years ago. I will protect you, he said quietly. Both of you, I promise. Helenas' eyes were huge and dark, but for the first time since he had met her, they were not filled with fear. Something else lived there now. Trust, maybe, or hope. He learned that Latopi had been training as a tactical specialist before the crash, that her manipulation of him had not been just clever thinking, but actual application of psychological warfare principles. She was 8 years old and already more dangerous than most human soldiers twice her age. On the 4th day, Michael could stand again. On the 5th, he could walk without support, though every step sent fresh pain through his ribs. Faniella watched him pace the perimeter of their shelter with an expression that might have been amusement or concern. You push yourself too hard, she observed. Your body needs more time to heal. We do not have time. You said it yourself, more hunters will come. We need to move. Moving too soon will kill you just as surely as staying. Then I guess we find the balance. Michael stopped pacing and looked at her. On the 6th day we plan, on the 7th we move. That gives me 1 more day to heal and you 1 more day to rest. Deal? Faniella considered, then nodded. Deal, but I lead the march. You are in no condition to set pace. Fine by me. You know the terrain better anyway. And he learned that Faniella, despite her initial wariness, had come to trust him in a way she trusted few others. It was in the way she let him hold her weapons to examine them, explaining their balance and construction. It was in the way she shared information about her faction's military structure, political landscape, all the intelligence that could be weaponized against her if he betrayed her trust. It was in the way she sometimes touched his shoulder when speaking, that gesture of respect among her people. And it was in the way she let her daughters stay close to him, even when he was armed, even when they were vulnerable. On the evening of the 5th day, they sat together watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of red and gold. The children were inside, Latopi teaching Helena some sort of game with pebbles. What will you do? Faniella asked. After, if we succeed, if the war ends. Michael had not thought that far ahead. His entire focus had been on the next challenge, the next threat, keeping them alive 1 more day. The future was an abstract concept. I do not know, he said honestly. Go back to port security, I guess. Resume my boring life watching shipping containers. That would be waste of your skills. Maybe, but it is quiet. And after all this, quiet sounds pretty good. Faniella smiled slightly. You are lying, to yourself, I think. You need purpose, need to matter. Quiet would kill you slower than bullets. She was right, and they both knew it. Michael laughed, a short, pained sound. Okay, what would you have me do? Come with us, help build the peace. We will need bridge builders, people who can work between our species, people both sides can trust. She looked at him. You have earned that trust. From my daughters. From me. Maybe you can earn it from others. I am not a diplomat. Neither am I, but I am what we have. and you are what we have. Sometimes that is enough. Michael thought about it, about going back to his empty apartment, his empty life, pretending that none of this had happened, about trying to forget these three blue-skinned aliens who had crashed into his life and reminded him what it meant to care about something beyond survival. Ask me again when we reach the settlement, he said. When I know you are safe, then I will think about the future. Fair enough. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere out there, fleets were fighting. People were dying, the war ground on, mindless and brutal. But here in this small canyon, four beings from two species were finding something unexpected. Not quite friendship yet, but maybe the beginning of it. On the sixth day, they began planning. The evidence needs to reach neutral territory, Faniella said, laying out rough maps in the dirt. There is a human settlement here, 3 days walk north. They have communications equipment that can broadcast to both our peoples. If we can reach it, we can end this war. 3 days walking, Michael said, through territory crawling with Gorethi hunters, with 2 small children, while you and I are both injured. Should be fun. You do not have to come, Faniella said, but there was no real expectation in her voice. She knew he would come. I have put this much effort into keeping you alive, Michael replied. Not going to quit now. They left at dawn, moving fast and light. Michael had fashioned a crude spear from salvaged materials, while Faniella carried a sword she had taken from one of the dead hunters, modified to fit her grip. Laudapi carried Helena's on her back in a makeshift harness, refusing offers of help with a stubbornness that reminded Michael of himself. The first day was quiet, too quiet. Michael's combat instincts screamed at him, but there was nothing to see, no sign of pursuit. They made good time, covering maybe 15 miles before stopping to rest in a cave system Faniella knew about. The cave was shallow but provided good concealment, tucked into a cliff face that would be invisible from most angles. Faniella had scouted it during her initial escape attempt, back when she still had hope of reaching friendly territory before the hunters caught up. Now it was just a waypoint on a longer journey. They ate in silence, sharing the meager supplies Michael had salvaged from the bunker. Dried rations that tasted like cardboard but provided calories, and water from a canteen Faniella had managed to save from the crash. Not enough for 4 people making hard miles, but it would have to do. Foraging was too dangerous with hunters potentially tracking them. Tomorrow will be worse, Faniella said quietly, studying the terrain visible from the cave mouth. We enter the broken lands, no cover, no water, exposed from all sides. If they find us there, we will not escape. Then we move at night, Michael suggested. Harder to spot thermal signatures against cold ground. You know tactics. It was not a question. Enough to stay alive this long. Faniella studied him with those intense eyes, the same calculating assessment her daughters had given him, measuring, testing, looking for weaknesses. My daughters trust you. That is rare. They do not trust easily. They did not have much choice. There is always choice. They could have run from you, could have attacked when your back was turned, could have left you to the hunters and saved themselves. She paused. Laudapi tells me you gave them that choice. In the bunker, when the hunters came. You told them to run if you died, but they stayed, waited for you. Why do you think that is? Michael did not answer immediately. He was watching Laudapi and Helenus, curled together near the back of the cave, both seemingly asleep but probably listening. Children always listened. I do not know, he said finally. Maybe because I kept my word. Maybe because they were desperate enough to take a chance on a stranger. Maybe because your people and mine are not as different as we like to think. That last one, Faniella said, that is dangerous thinking. It gets people killed. Everything gets people killed. At least that way we die for something that matters. Faniella was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, you would have been a good officer if you had stayed military. I was not good at following orders. Best officers never are. They lapsed into silence, taking turns on watch through the night. Michael took the first shift, sitting near the cave entrance with his spear across his knees, watching the darkness beyond. The land here was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Jagged rock formations casting strange shadows in the moonlight, dry riverbeds that had not seen water in decades, twisted vegetation that somehow survived on almost nothing. When Faniella took over, Michael tried to sleep, but could not. His body was exhausted, but his mind would not quiet. Too many variables, too many ways this could go wrong. Even if they reached the settlement, even if Philip believed them, even if the broadcast went out, there was no guarantee it would change anything. Wars had momentum. They did not stop just because someone proved they started with lies. But it was the only play they had. The second day began before dawn. They moved quickly through the broken lands using what little cover existed, shallow depressions, scattered boulder fields, the occasional dead tree. The sun rose hot and merciless, baking the rocky ground until it shimmered with heat waves. Michael's injured shoulder ached constantly, and he could feel infection spreading despite his best efforts. Fever was building, making everything feel distant and unreal. They were crossing an exposed stretch of hardpan when Faniella suddenly stopped, her hand raised in a fist, the universal signal for halt. Michael froze, following her gaze. There, perhaps a mile ahead, 4 figures in dark armor were blocking the narrow pass they needed to traverse. "Patrol," Faniella said quietly. "Standard hunter configuration. They are waiting for us." "Can we go around?" She shook her head. "This is the only pass for 20 miles in either direction. Going around would add 2 days to our journey. We do not have 2 days." Michael studied the terrain, his tactical mind automatically analyzing angles and approaches. The pass was maybe 30 yards wide, with sheer cliffs on either side. No way to flank, no way to bypass. It was a perfect ambush position, which meant the hunters knew they were coming. "They want us to come to them," he said. "Wait until we are committed to the perces, then hit us from all sides, probably more hunters in concealment on those cliffs." "Yes, classic kill box." Faniella looked at him. "We could wait, try to find another route. And starve? No water out here, no shade. We have maybe 1 day before Helena's cannot go on." Michael's mind was racing through options, discarding them as quickly as they formed. Then an idea came, desperate and stupid, but maybe workable. "You said you were a military commander. Ever run a feint?" Faniella's eyes narrowed. "What are you thinking?" "You and I draw them out, make them commit to engagement. While they are focused on us, Lotopy takes Helena's through a different route. That ravine to the east looks shallow enough for children to climb. She gets past the kill box, finds shelter on the other side, waits for us. And if we do not make it, then she keeps going, reaches the settlement, delivers the evidence." Michael looked at the children, still watching silently. "Lotopy, can you do that? Get your sister to safety no matter what?" Lotopy's face was expressionless, but her eyes were hard. "Yes, but I do not want to." "I know, but it is the smart play. Your mother and I are better equipped for fighting. You are better equipped for getting Helena's to safety. We each do what we do best." Faniella looked between Michael and her daughters, then nodded slowly. "He is right, much as I hate it, he is right." She knelt down and pulled both children close, speaking rapidly in their own language. Lotopy argued, her voice rising, but Faniella cut her off with a sharp gesture. Finally, Lotopy nodded, tears streaming down her face. They split up. Lotopy took Helena's and headed east, moving quickly toward the ravine that would bypass the kill box. Michael and Faniella gave them 5 minutes head start, then began walking openly toward the pass. The hunters spotted them immediately. 4 figures emerged from concealment, spreading out to block the pass. Michael and Faniella kept walking, weapons visible but not raised in immediate threat, playing it casual like they had not noticed the trap. They were maybe 50 yards from the hunters when Michael and Faniella looked at each other, a wordless exchange of information and intent. Then they moved as one. Michael went low and right, Faniella went high and left. The hunters had expected caution, negotiation, maybe a desperate attempt to fight through. They had not expected an immediate, coordinated assault from 2 opponents moving like they had trained together for years. Michael took the nearest hunter's legs with his spear, driving the blade through the joint behind its knee where the armor was thinner. The Gorethi went down with a roar, and Michael was already moving to the next one, using the falling body as cover. Faniella drove her sword through another hunter's visor with surgical precision, then spun to engage a third. The fourth hunter was raising some kind of signaling device when Michael threw his knife, a wild, desperate throw that caught the Gorethi in the wrist. The device clattered to the ground, and Michael dove for it, sliding across the rocky ground, ignoring the scrape of stone on his already damaged skin. He grabbed the device and smashed it against a boulder, crushing the electronics. The third hunter got past Faniela's guard and clubbed her across the ribs. She went down, gasping, and the hunter raised its weapon for a killing blow. Michael tackled it from behind, his arms wrapping around its neck, trying to find purchase on the smooth armor. The Gorethi thrashed, trying to shake him off, and Michael held on with everything he had, his legs wrapped around his torso, his arms squeezing. Faniela recovered and drove her sword up through the hunter's chin, the blade emerging from the top of its helmet. Michael released his grip and rolled away as the Gorethi collapsed. "They know where we are now," Faniela said, breathing hard, one hand pressed to her side where the club had connected. "We have maybe 2 hours before reinforcements arrive. Then we run." They actually ran, despite injuries, despite exhaustion, following the path Latopi and Helenas had taken. The ravine was steep and treacherous, loose rocks sliding beneath their feet, but they pushed through. Behind them, Michael could hear the sound of pursuit beginning. More hunters, alerted by the fight, converging on their position. They caught up with the children an hour later, found them hiding in a small cave halfway up the ravine's far side. Latopi had her arms wrapped protectively around Helena's, and both of them were shaking with terror and relief when they saw their mother. "No time," Faniela said. "We move now, fast as we can." They moved. Latopi somehow kept pace, her small legs pumping furiously despite carrying Helena's. Michael's lungs burned, his legs felt like lead, and the fever was making everything swim in and out of focus. But he kept moving because stopping meant death. The third day was a blur of pain and exhaustion. They pushed through terrain that should have taken 2 days to cross, driven by fear and desperation. Michael's fever was worse now, hot and cold flashes alternating, making him shiver even under the brutal sun. Faniela had to support him for the last few miles, one of his arms draped over her shoulders, his feet barely touching the ground. The settlement appeared as the sun was setting on the third day, its lights flickering in the gathering dusk. It was larger than Michael had expected, maybe 200 people, humans and a few other species living together in an uneasy peace. The communications tower rose from the center, a cobbled-together monstrosity of salvaged parts that somehow managed to function. Salvation, or at least a chance at it. They were met at the perimeter by guards, humans with hunting rifles and suspicious expressions. Michael stepped forward, or tried to. His legs gave out, and he would have fallen if Faniela had not caught him. "I am Michael," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Former port security. I have refugees seeking asylum and information vital to ending the war. We need access to your communications array." The guards looked at each other, then at Faniela and the children. One of them, an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward. "I am Philip, settlement leader. You look like hell, Michael. All of you do. And you say you can end the war? That is a big claim." "It is the truth," Faniela said, her English better than her daughter's, but still accented. "I have proof that my faction initiated hostilities through false flag operations. The war began with lies. It can end with truth." Philip studied her for a long moment. "If I let you broadcast and it turns out you are lying or wrong, I will have just declared this settlement a military target. You understand that?" "I understand. I also understand that without this broadcast, the war continues. More die, human and Gorethi both. How many more are you willing to lose rather than risk the truth?" Philip looked at Michael. "You vouch for this?" "I vouch for her," Michael said. "I have seen what they have been through, seen what she is willing to sacrifice. She is telling the truth." Philip was quiet for another moment, then nodded. "Come, but you broadcast under guard, and if anything seems wrong, we shut it down immediately." They were led to the communications center, a converted warehouse with more equipment than Michael had seen in one place since before the war. Technicians worked at various stations, monitoring channels, sending and receiving messages across the fractured communication networks. Faniela approached the main console, Latopi at her side. Helena stayed with Michael, her small hand gripping his. The first time she had willingly touched anyone except her mother or sister. "Ready when you are," the lead technician said, a woman named Sarah with tattoos running down both arms. "This will go out on all major channels, human and Gorethi. No taking it back once it starts." Faniella nodded. She placed her hands on the interface panels, and suddenly her eyes glowed with soft blue light. The genetic data, Michael realized. She was uploading everything. "My name is Faniella of the Gorethi Outer Colonies," she began, speaking in both Gorethi and English simultaneously, her voice being translated and broadcast. "I am transmitting proof that the war between our peoples began not with human aggression, but with a false flag operation orchestrated by elements of my own government. The following data shows the exact timeline, the identities of those responsible, and the evidence that was suppressed. I am transmitting this because too many have died for lies. Humans and Gorethi both. It must end." Data began flooding the channels. Command codes, operation files, communications between the conspiracy members, visual evidence. Everything laid bare for both species to see. The reaction was immediate. Communication channels exploded with activity, voices demanding confirmation, denying the evidence, calling for investigations, calling for more war, chaos, but also voices calling for peace, demanding answers from their governments. Humans and Gorethi both, suddenly united in their confusion and anger at having been manipulated. Faniella continued transmitting for hours, answering questions from journalists and military personnel on both sides, providing clarification, offering additional proof. Latopi stood beside her, occasionally adding her own testimony. Even Helena spoke, her voice small but clear, reciting exact dates and times from her perfect memory. Michael watched it all from the shadows, feeling something strange and unfamiliar in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or just exhaustion finally catching up with him. Philip approached, standing beside him. "You did a remarkable thing bringing them here. Protecting them." "I did what needed doing," Michael said. "Nothing more." That is always how heroes describe themselves, as ordinary people doing what needs doing. "I am not a hero. I am just someone who could not walk away. Like I said, a hero." Michael did not argue. He was too tired to argue. The broadcast ended as dawn broke. Faniella stepped away from the console, visibly exhausted but standing straight. Latopi immediately went to her mother, wrapping her arms around Faniella's waist. Helena's joined them a moment later. But the moment of relief was shattered by the sound of alarms. Red lights began flashing throughout the communications center, and Sarah's hands flew across her console. "We have incoming," she shouted. "Multiple contacts approaching from the south. Fast movers, military configuration." Philip was already moving, barking orders, and the settlement guards rushed to defensive positions. Michael grabbed his spear, ignoring the protest from his barely healed ribs. "How many?" Faniella demanded, moving to the tactical display. 8, maybe 10. Gorethi hunter configuration." Sarah looked up, her face pale. "They must have been tracking the broadcast signal. They know we are here." "The children," Michael said immediately. "We need to get them to shelter." But Latopi shook her head, her small face set with determination. "No, we stay, we fight. This is our war too." "You are 8 years old," Michael began, but Faniella cut him off. "She is right. They are hunting us, not the settlement. If we run, the hunters will follow. If we stay and fight, maybe the settlement has a chance." She looked at Philip. "Evacuate your people. We will buy you time." "The hell you will," Philip said. "This is our home. We fight for it." The arguments died as the first explosions rocked the perimeter. The hunters were not bothering with subtlety. They were coming straight through, and they were coming hard. Michael and Faniella moved to the entrance, taking position where they could see the approach. The settlement guards formed up alongside them, a ragged line of defenders armed with rifles, hunting weapons, whatever they could find. Not enough. Not nearly enough against armored Gorethi, but they were what the settlement had. The first hunter emerged from the smoke of the explosions, its armor scorched but intact. Then another, and another. 6 visible, and Michael's trained eye caught movement that suggested more in reserve. They had come prepared for a fight. "Steady!" Faniella called out, her voice carrying across the defensive line. Wait for clean shots. Aim for joints and visors. Do not waste ammunition. The hunters advanced methodically, professional and coordinated. They were not charging blindly. They knew what they were facing and were taking no chances. Smart, which made them more dangerous. The first shot came from one of the settlement guards, a younger man whose nerve broke. It went wide, and suddenly everyone was firing, the defensive line erupting in a ragged volley. Some shots found their marks, staggering hunters but not dropping them. Most bounced off armor or went wide. Michael waited until he had a clear opening, then threw his spear with every bit of strength he could muster. It caught a hunter in the throat, the one vulnerable spot where the helmet met the chest plate. The Gorethi went down and Michael was already moving, grabbing a rifle from a fallen guard, firing in controlled bursts. Faniella fought like a demon, her captured sword singing through the air, finding gaps in armor with surgical precision. She dropped one hunter, then another, her movements fluid and deadly. But there were too many. The defensive line was breaking. Then Helenas did something unexpected. She ran forward, straight toward the advancing hunters, and started shouting in their language. Michael's heart stopped, certain he was about to watch her die. But the hunters hesitated. Whatever Helenas was saying, it was giving them pause. She was pointing back toward the communications center, gesturing frantically, her voice rising and falling in what sounded like desperate pleading. She is telling them the broadcast is incomplete, Laudapi translated, her voice awed. She is saying that the real evidence is still in the system, that destroying the center now would just bury the truth forever. She is lying, but they are believing her. The hunters consulted among themselves, their body language suggesting confusion and uncertainty. They had come to eliminate the evidence, but now they were being told that destroying the center would accomplish nothing. One of them, the leader presumably, raised a hand in a gesture that might have been surrender or truce. It spoke in heavily accented English. Proof of broadcast completion. Show us. Sarah, to her credit, did not hesitate. She pulled up the transmission logs, showed them the recipient lists, the confirmation signals, and from dozens of receiving stations across both human and Gorethi space. It is done. The data is out there. Destroying us changes nothing. The hunter leader was quiet for a long moment. Then it lowered its weapon. Orders were contained, evidence scattered, mission failure. It looked at Faniella. You win, this day. Not winning, Faniella said quietly. Just ending the lie. What happens next is up to all of us. The hunters withdrew, slowly, keeping weapons ready but not raised. Michael did not lower his rifle until they were out of sight, and even then he kept it close. Helenas, he said, looking at the small girl who had just saved them all with quick thinking and desperate lies. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I have ever seen. Helenas looked up at him, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. A real smile, bright and genuine. Then she spoke, her voice clear and strong despite its softness. You taught me. Fighting is not always with weapons. Sometimes is with words, with courage. She paused. Thank you for teaching me how to be brave. Michael felt something break in his chest, the last of his carefully maintained emotional armor cracking wide open. He knelt down and pulled both children into a careful hug, mindful of his injuries, but not caring about the pain. You were already brave, he said quietly. I just gave you a reason to show it. Faniella looked across the room at Michael. Without words, she extended one hand toward him, an invitation, or maybe an acknowledgement. Michael limped across the room and took her hand. Her grip was strong, warm, alive. They stood there for a moment, three survivors of different species holding on to each other, while the world outside began, maybe, to change. Thank you, Faniella said quietly. For my daughters, for me, for all of us. Thank you for trusting me, Michael replied, for letting me help. Will there be peace? Laudapi asked, looking up at them both. Will the war end? I do not know, Faniella said honestly. Peace is harder than war. It requires more courage, more strength. But now at least people know the truth. What they do with it is up to them. Michael looked at the three of them, this strange alien family he had somehow become entangled with. and felt that unfamiliar hope strengthen. Maybe the war would end, maybe it would not. But for the first time in years, there was at least a chance. Outside, the sun rose over the settlement, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A new day, maybe even a new beginning. Michael had started this journey as a simple port security guard trying to stop a murder. He was ending it as something else. Not a hero, not a savior, just someone who had made a choice and followed it through to the end. Just someone who had helped when help was needed. And maybe in the end, that was enough.